We know the old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. But we believe that from the fracture, we can build something bigger, better, stronger, more just. This is the task of the middle powers. The countries that have the most to lose from a world of fortresses and a most to gain from genuine cooperation. The powerful have their power. But we have something too. The capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, to build our strength at home, and to act together. That is Canada's path. We choose it openly and confidently, and it is a path wide open to any country willing to take it with us.
On Closer Look across the Village Media Network and wherever you get your favorite podcast with Michael Friscolanti. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Everybody's still talking about the speech that Prime Minister Carney gave in Davos a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I've listened to it a few times just to make sure you didn't miss anything. It was about 17 minutes. It was a very consequential speech, pretty powerful. It's been interesting to read the reaction to it. There's still obviously going to be people who, basically the Prime Minister talked about how the old rules-based order is dead.
Right.
And it's something he's talked about. It's not like this is new. He said this even when he was running to be against Pierre Poilievre in the last election.
Yep.
He told us when we sat down on our podcast a couple days before the election that, yes, it's not going back to the way it was. The America that we knew is no longer. And he made a case for what middle powers like Canada can do. And it was a very powerful speech. It was certainly very honest.
Yes.
It wasn't trying to sugarcoat the situation we're in. And it was, for me, it was like that final snip, right? It was like cutting all ties, even though
Cutting
we're
the
still,
cord, yeah.
we're right beside America. We always will be, but that old relationship is no longer.
You know the line that I love the most? If you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
Yes, that was a great line.
Yeah.
And I think the other one that stuck out was nostalgia is not a strategy, I think was the quote,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We want to remember the way things were, and it's not like that. And I remember the Prime Minister talking to us, too, about how he's convinced that if we reduce and get rid of interprovincial trade barriers here, and if we make other deals with other countries, we can more than make up for what we'll lose in the United States.
For sure.
I still think that's the big outstanding question, whether that's possible. And that's what I think when you listen to opposition politicians talk about this speech, they're saying, okay, that's just still not reality. That the U.S. is a massive trading partner, and it's just not easy to say we're going to go make some different deals and not deal with the United States anymore. So that'll be the question going forward, I think. But for him to, like I said, I think he said a lot of those things over the last year, but to say it in that manner, on that stage, in that crowd, with that audience, with the world watching, with Trump being there as well,
absolutely,
was very powerful. And I think, a lot of people who are a lot smarter than us who know these things, or, students of history who have been worked behind the scenes with prime ministers, they're calling this, a speech of the generation. Like they haven't seen a speech like this from a prime minister in 100 years.
Yeah.
So this is, it was a big moment. And so we're going to kind of explore that a little bit today with Peter Dinolo, who is the former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. He says he's semi-retired. I'm not sure if I believe it. He's a busy man. But, I think he's a great person to understand sort of how these decisions come together. Because it wasn't just done on a whim where the Prime Minister said, okay, I'm going to get up here and say all these things. This would have been months in the works, a lot of discussions. I think there would have been a lot of discussions with some of his, counterparts in other countries, these other middle powers, so to speak, about what he was going to say. It's definitely a big moment, and we just want to dissect it a little bit more, so we're looking forward to chatting with Peter about it.
Earlier this week, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered what is fair to say was a speech heard round the world, addressing the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Carney was blunt. He said we're at a turning point for Canada and for the world, and that the old rules-based order is officially dead. He also stressed that for middle powers like Canada, there is a path forward. As you can imagine, lots of reaction to the PM's words, both good and bad. Joining us tonight to talk about the speech and what comes next is someone who is no stranger to what goes on behind the scenes in the Prime Minister's office. Peter Dinolo, a political strategist who worked for years as the Director of Communications for former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Peter, thanks for your time. We appreciate you joining us tonight.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, Peter, let's start with the obvious question. What went through your mind as you listened to the Prime Minister's speech?
Listen, I thought it was like a lot of people. I was very impressed. As a Canadian, I felt proud. I heard him calling a spade and speaking bluntly and eloquently about the shape of the world. Like a lot of people, I've been very frustrated by what most world leaders felt they've had to do over the last year with Donald Trump, which is bite their tongue, pretend that everything is normal, pretend that he's not threatening and rattling sabers, and I found it very, very uncomfortable. And it's worried me deeply. So I was very pleased when the Prime Minister kind of took up the mantle, said it like it is, and acted as a bit of a, well, he turned out to be the sensation of Davos, of the international community, and I think he inspired other leaders. So yeah, I thought it was great, but I really thought it was great. But I mean, there's a lot more to do.
Absolutely, we're going to get into that for sure. It's a great point you make, because I've wondered that too. Right? There's all this walking on eggshells, especially when you go to the Oval Office. You just wonder, what's going to happen to them when you make sure that nothing, you say all the right things. That's a lot of pressure. How much thought would go into this decision to finally say, we know he said this a little bit in the past, but the relation, the America we knew is not the America we know now. To actually say that on this world stage like that, how much thought would have gone into that, Peter?
I think a ton. I think, listen, with Trump, both Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney have tried various different approaches. Early on in the first Trump administration, the Trudeau government tried to assuage him, tried to butter him up, flatter him. It doesn't work with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, in a kind of classic way that we've seen through history, the more that people bend, the more he wants to crush them. The more power that he gets, the more he wants. And I think what's really interesting this time is there's been a lot of commentary on it that Trump, point to two is different from the first Trump administration. And I think the main reason is there's been very little pushback to his aggression. So that's both domestically, where, as you guys know, he's bent the legislative wing to his power. He's pushed around universities. He's had media outlets fire their editorial people and kind of rejig to suit his message. He's squeezed money out of the law firms. Mm-hmm. and corporations, and internationally, I think the other big. So he's sort of felt unbound domestically, but I also think he's felt unbound internationally, and that's another big difference from his first term. And I think that really started with the bombing of the Iranian nuclear reactors last summer, when last spring, I guess, when he'd always kind of, eschewed military displays, or at least, military might. When during his first term, he was very critical of Bush for the Iraq War and other foreign engagements. And yet, I think he really felt pumped when he bombed those reactors, regardless of whether or not it was truly successful. I think he felt further kind of enlarged by taking out Maduro in Venezuela. And I think the psychology of this guy is that when he keeps on pushing and nobody pushes back, it just enlarges his appetite. So my guess is that a lot of the leaders, including our prime minister, who were kind of willing to try different approaches, have seen actually that this kind of appeasement has only made him more ravenous. Mm-hmm. And my second guess would be that I don't think that he gave the speech without actually probably talking to some of his peers, some of the other G7 leaders, to kind of gauge where they're at. And I think that the view was that the moment was ripe, that he was in a particular position to do it because of Trump's increasing kind of obsession with Canada. You saw that map of North America he put out the other day with the U.S. Flag on it. So I guess my guess is, of all our prime ministers, I think it's pretty clear, maybe with the exception of actually Lester Pearson, that Mark Carney comes to the job with an unparalleled network of international connections, and he's been using them. But he's been deploying them as prime minister, and I think now that was useful for him in this Davos speech.
Peter, other specifics about the speech, perhaps, that struck you?
I mean, I loved when he talked about the kind of bringing together the Asian economies with the European economies. I mean, I call it. I wish and I invite him to use this term if anyone's listening, which is that he should call this a coalition of the unwilling to be pushed around, the unwilling to be threatened by the large powers. And as you know, it's not just the U.S., although obnoxiously it's Donald Trump for us, but there's also Russia and obviously China. And I think Trump does have this view that let's split the world up into three zones. And I won't bug you if you want to push around Ukraine, or if China wants to push around Taiwan, give me free reign in my backyard. And that just crushes the international order. And I think it's important that, so what I liked with the PM speech is that it wasn't about Canada. You usually go there. I attended Davos with Prime Minister Chrétien many years ago. You go there and you sell the country, you sell it hard. And he did some of that. I think he did it mostly in the private sessions he had with all these guys. But what he really acted like was sort of like the conscience of the world here, the conscience of the small powers that are tired of being pushed around. And small and medium-sized powers, because obviously the other G7 countries are not small powers. And I think that was very effective. It's a bit like the emperor has no clothes, right? The guy who finally says it, after everyone else kind of shuffles around and pretends that he's well dressed, the guy who finally says the emperor has no clothes ends up being a big hero, and I think that's what's happening this week.
It's a great analogy. The detail that's really struck me too is there's a lot of people saying that Mark Carney wrote this speech himself. That I'm assuming he had some help, but that's not very common, is it, Peter?
No, not at all. I mean, a prime minister's a pretty busy guy. No, it's not at all common. I mean, usually a very engaged prime minister will work very closely with senior aides to work a speech. He'll go through several drafts. He'll have input. Obviously, might rewrite stuff. One of my favorite kind of copies of a speech is at the FDR Library in Hyde Park in New York, where his speech declaring war on Japan in 1941, he's crossed out a day that will go down in history, and written in his own pen, a day that will go down in infamy. And so sometimes, these you've either got it or you have it as an orator, but for him to do it himself. But this is a subject. I think there's two issues. One is I think that his worldview, he's a very smart guy. He's been on the international stage for a long time. And I think his worldview is something that is fully developed. And so I don't think it would have been difficult for him to put it down on paper in that sense, or to dictate it, or whatever it was. And I also think that he's also comfortable on the international stage, and particularly comfortable at Davos. I read somewhere that this was his 30th Davos conference. So I think that he had a strong comfort level. He did what, for someone who's not a politician, who's famously, avowedly not a career politician, he was very, very good at reading the room, both specifically, in terms of the physical room and more broadly. Something that actually Donald Trump was not yesterday.
Well, I want to speak to Donald Trump as well, but the reaction to the speech, all kinds of different reactions. Some from the opposition, kind of what you said at the beginning of the conversation is, okay, these are great words. Where's the action? What do we need to do next, Peter?
Actually, I don't think the problem is the action. I think the government has unleashed a ton of action in terms of, the energy agreement with Alberta, the major projects initiative, which is also going to reduce the impediments to building major infrastructure projects, the trade missions to China, and he'll be going to India soon. So I think he's doing a lot. I think the government has actually put together a pretty comprehensive package to make the country more economically resilient and less vulnerable to the Americans. But I think what he needs to do, what I don't think he's really done, is he hasn't addressed Canadians and said to them, hey, this is the plan. This is why I'm going to China. This is why I think we need to build pipelines. This is why we're de-emphasizing some of the priorities of the previous government and emphasizing other ones. This is why we have to cut government spending to make the government more lean and more efficient. And I don't think he's kind of connected the dots for Canadians. I've long advocated that he ought to be giving a formal address to the nation, sitting at his desk. It's a rare thing for a prime minister to do, but this is one of those existential moments where I think he ought to do it, where he actually sits at his desk, speaks solemnly, directly, but clearly and conversationally to Canadians, not a stump speech, but a speech like that has the import of an address to the nation, and that he also outlines, guys, we've been through the easy part in a sense, passing the legislation. We know that the economy has not taken the hit that many feared that it would early on. The TSX, had its banner year last year. Unemployment is not particularly high. And these things are, I think, maybe lulling Canadians into a false sense of security. Mm-hmm. My concern is that we all fall back into politics as usual. The environmentalists natter about we don't want pipelines. First Nations groups try and stop projects to flex their muscles. Human rights activists try and say let's not deal with China, let's not deal with India, and they've all got valid points. But there's one point which is more important, which is, do we want to have a country, yes or no? And if we do, we need to make compromises, and we need to be bloody minded about keeping ourselves independent. I think the PM needs to do that, and he needs to also signal to Canadians that, there's going to be a need for two things on your part: for patience and for sacrifice. And, when was the last time we heard a prime minister or a leader in this country kind of call for people to be ready to sacrifice? I think that's where we are, and I think the PM needs to do that. I hope he does.
Peter, Trump responded the next day by saying Canada lives because of the U.S. Is he wrong?
Well, he sounds like a mafia don when he speaks. nice grocery store you have. I wouldn't want anything bad to happen to it. Every word he ever utters about Canada has the undertone of a violent threat. Do we exist? We have enjoyed a relationship with the U.S. that on the whole has been beneficial for Canada, particularly for our cost of, for our quality of life, for our standard of living. There's no question. It hasn't all been moonlight and roses, though. There have been downsides, and we can talk about those. But on the whole, it's been good. But if that country, that is sliding into an ugly authoritarianism, and I believe that Trump is a fascist. I wouldn't have said that the first term. I thought that was overkill. I don't think that's the case now. If we believe that country is sliding into that, that's a threat to us. And he's right that we've leaned on the U.S. Canadian business, and my clients were like among the blue chip Canadian companies. But let's face it, guys, they leaned on the advantage of the low Canadian dollar, access to the American market, without kind of investing in to the degree they needed to in their own efficiencies, in making business more innovative, in looking at other markets in the world. And so we got sort of fat and lazy, relying on the U.S. market. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. Not to mix too many metaphors in there, so I think, he's got a point about that. But it's also like, he's also kind of like licking his chops, getting ready to swallow us. And we got to be able to push back.
It's a great segue into the question I want to ask you. We want to play you this clip from our sit down with the Prime Minister last year, if we can, Peter, if you don't mind, Derek.
I say this often: we can't change President Trump. He's got fixed ideas. He's 78 years old, and we can negotiate hard and get the best deal for Canada. What we can do, though, is first and foremost take care of ourselves here. I often make this point, but I'm going to make it again. We can give ourselves far more than the Americans can ever take away. We can more than cover what Trump tariffs will do to us negatively.
What I want to ask you is that accurate? That we keep hearing that from the Prime Minister, from others, that if we could still, if we make deals with other countries, it'll make up for what we lost in the U.S. Is that true?
The economy is changing so rapidly that I think that a lot of the traditional assumptions about how you get economic growth are falling away. That's true in the United States as it is here. Look at the extent to which AI has pumped up the bubble in the American economy and the American stock market. So, is it true? I think what the PM is probably saying is by being aggressive and innovative, that we can be a lot better off than we think we can. And I think it's true also in that I think the corollary is true, which is, as I said, I think we got a bit like smug and lazy, relying on access to the American market. You know, I was a consul general in Milan in Italy, you know, 2 decades ago, and the big selling point to get Italian investment into Canada was to tell them about how. You know, you invest in Canada, you build a distribution center or a plant in Canada, and you'll have access to the, you know, this huge U.S. market, but with a lot of advantages in Canada that they don't have in the U.S. Healthcare for employees, you know, resources, yada, yada. And that's not true anymore. So we need to find, and I think the government understands, I think the Prime Minister understands, particularly given his background, some of the, you know, where the global economy is going. And I think he's right to position us there. And one of the ways to do it is, listen, we need, to a certain extent, we need to go backwards and forwards at the same time. We need to focus on the kind of the positive AI, the kind of technical innovation that the Prime Minister's spoken about. But we also need to go backwards instead of, and that to a certain extent, and that is instead of shunning the resource wealth we have and looking at it as a kind of drawback, making us, what is it, hewers of wood and drawers of water, as the old put down went, that is actually a strength for us that the world needs. And I look at fossil fuels. Listen, fossil fuels are bad on the whole for the economy, or for the world, for the globe. But the world is transitioning out of those. In the meantime, we have a wealth of them in Canada. That why would we not want to use those internationally in order to buck up the economy across the country so that we can move forward? Like, why do we want to deny ourselves that economic ability over the period of, there's not a long time ahead, you know, of a couple of decades ahead of us? Why would we want to do that? I think the Prime Minister and his government are right on that. But a lot of Canadians don't agree with that, and he's going to need to do a convincing job on him. One of the best descriptions of leadership I ever read, and I forget who said it, is leadership is getting people to do what they don't want to do. and you know, or let's put it this way, what's hard to do. And so, yes, the PM ticks a box of a competent, effective CEO. But he's not just a CEO; he's our leader, and I think he's getting more comfortable with that. And if the speech in Davos is any indication, I think he's ready to put it to Canadians in a more direct way.
I appreciate that, Peter. I know you're semi-retired, but I feel like you'd be ready to jump back into the PMO right now.
Listen, when I was in the Prime Minister's office, and listen, my boss was the greatest guy. He just turned 92. Was in Ottawa celebrating Mr. Chrétien's 92nd on January 11th, the same day as Sir John A. Macdonald's birthday, by the way. And he was the greatest boss I ever had. He had I had the second lowest blood pressure in Ottawa because he had the lowest. And he was a ton of fun to work for. He knew exactly what he was doing. He turned the country around from a very difficult period in terms of both the economy and national unity. And when he left after 10 years, Canadians felt a ton better about their country than they had in a long time. And that's another definition of leadership. So no, I gave it the office and I enjoyed it, but it's more like, you know, like what? No, they've got a crew there, a generation there, that competent people. I'm always ready to hector from the outside, like the great mother-in-law. But you know, and so you know, free advice is worth what you pay for it, guys.
That's right.
Peter, speaking of your former boss, did he or any other PM, say in the last 75 years, give such an important speech?
You know, it's no, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. I think the moment is so different. I mean, listen, Prime Minister Chrétien is the last Prime Minister, the only Prime Minister in the last 50 years who said no to the Americans over Iraq. So I think that's important. But that wasn't a particular speech. That was an action. So no, I mean, I think this is, you know, this is one of those moments. As you know, Canadian Prime Ministers, Pierre Trudeau being an exception, are not particularly known for their stirring rhetoric at the podium. I mean, the Prime Minister Chrétien was a you know, unequaled and probably actually still is, an unequaled kind of stump speaker. He can, if you want to rouse an audience, he's the guy to go to, and he still does it. He did it at the leadership convention, in fact, last spring. So he's the guy to go to, but that's different from this kind of speech at Davos. But in fairness, we didn't have these challenges in the 90s. In the 90s, I hate to talk about the good old days, but in the 90s, I don't know if it was the end of history, like Fukuyama said, but it was at least a period of hopefulness, as a lot of walls, literally and figuratively, were coming down, and the world was coming together. Different era now. It's an era of fear and an era of a lot of pessimism. And I think that's another reason why the Prime Minister's words kind of, hit home so significantly at Davos.
Absolutely. Real quickly, I know you're a busy man and you got to go, but I told you once you get on the podcast, you would enjoy yourself and you'd keep talking. So I was right about that. I just want to talk about the China question, Peter, because that's one thing that's not about people's mind. This idea that, even just recently, Carney himself said that, China's the biggest threat that Canada faces, and now we've gone there, negotiated a deal. How do you sell that to Canadians? What's different between then and now?
I think you got to sell along the lines I talked about, the other issues that a lot of Canadians have problems with. Listen, World War II, we linked up. We linked up. The Allies linked up with Stalin's Soviet Union, which is as bloody a group of dictators and totalitarian state as you've ever come across. Okay, we linked up with them in order to beat a greater threat to the world. I'm not making the threat between the U.S. and Germany in the war, but I am saying that countries have interests that need to be served. Who was it who said that we don't have friends, we have interests? I don't agree with that 100%, but I do believe we have national interests. And I do agree with the Prime Minister when he says you can calibrate your engagement with, he said this in the speech in Davos, you can calibrate the level or the depth of your engagement with the country. It makes no sense for us to be so dependent on the United States and so vulnerable to them. That's why we're in the position we're in. And I think kind of putting your spreading your chips around makes a lot more sense. We don't agree with China on a bunch of levels, but I'm sure some of the equipment in your studio, some of the equipment in my home was made in China. It doesn't mean that we don't trade with them. And the fact is that we don't need to be supine in order to trade with other countries. And I would make one last point that China, for example, or India for that matter, although they have interfered with Canadian politics, we know, neither of them has openly called for the annexation of our country to theirs. That's a big difference.
That's a big difference. This is my last question, Peter. It's much lighter. You were the Canada's consul general in Milan, where the Olympics are going to be. Is the ice going to be okay for the Olympic hockey tournament? Have you have any sources over there telling you how it's going to
be? Too bad it's not in Toronto because it's freezing here.
I know, it's funny.
Peter, before we let you go, I know you co-host a great podcast called the Red Passport. Tell us about it and where can people find it and listen?
Right. So it's called Red Passport, and it's done on behalf of the CIC, the Canadian International Council, which is the group, a citizen-based group in Canada for people in across the country to join and get involved in foreign policy issues. And I co-hosted with two terrific former colleagues, former diplomats for Canada. One is Jeremy Kinsman, who is no stranger in the media. He was our ambassador to Moscow, to Rome, to London, a veteran Canadian diplomat who's got a lot to say on a lot of issues. And Louise Blais, who is very prominent in the media these days because of she was a head of mission. She was the Consul General Atlanta. She was in Washington at the United Nations for Canada, a very prominent Canadian diplomat who had significant experience, Canada, U.S. So we talk about these issues, every couple of weeks. We take different points of view, but we get along very well. It's very friendly, sometimes a little sharper, but still among friends. And I think that's the kind of conversation people want to hear. And you listen to us on Apple or on
Spotify.
Thank you.
There you go. Beautiful.
All right, good stuff. Red Passport. Peter, anything we didn't cover tonight that we should have?
This is great. And I hope you guys invite me back.
All right. I'm just going to say we'll keep you in the Rolodex, Peter.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, there's Peter Donolo, the former communications director for Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Peter, great to see you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.
It's too bad that we were tight for time with Peter because, man, I could have sat and listened to him all day. Imagine the stories.
It was a great conversation, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, I remember him when I was a young journalist. He was the boss for the media. He would answer all our questions. What was great is people didn't hear it. I mentioned it in the show, but Peter said, how long are we going to be? 15 minutes, perfect. He's a busy guy. He's semi-retired. He's got a lot going on. But I told him, you're going to enjoy being on this podcast. And sure enough, I think we ran a full half hour.
Yeah, we did. It was great. Red Passport. Got to check that out. Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts, just like this one. Closer Look at villagemedia.ca is our email address. And, of course, you can sign up and subscribe at closerlookpodcast.ca. For Derek Turner, executive producer of this evening's program, as always, and Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for watching tonight. We'll see you tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, right here on Closer Look.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.